welcome back to UMB's Science Student Playbook, the podcast series hosted by your Faculty of Science peer mentors.
My name is Hala.
And my name is Kayley.
And in this episode, we will dive into health professions and are incredibly fortunate to welcome some exceptional guests, each sharing their own unique and inspiring journeys and providing us with valuable insights from their lived experiences. If you're a student interested in pursuing a career in healthcare or medicine post-university, this is the perfect episode for you.
I know when looking into the process for becoming a healthcare professional, whether it be medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, and more, it can be hard to even know where to start. There are so many factors that contribute to a well-rounded professional school application, and it can be overwhelming to keep track of it all. Research, volunteering, work experience, shadowing, and the list goes on. That is why we are here with you today to debunk some of the misconceptions not only about the application process, but about what a career in the healthcare field looks like in today's world.
Embarking on a journey towards a career in healthcare and medicine comes with its challenges, but the profession is constantly evolving. Today, more than ever, doctors and healthcare professionals are in high demand in our society. Deciding whether or not to go into healthcare can be challenging when there are so many different questions to be asked about the application process, residency, and work-life balance. For today's episode, we bring you two special guests, Dr. Kolb and Hirbod. Joining us today is Dr. Phil Kolbs, a family medicine resident at Dalhousie Medicine at the Fredericton site. Nice to have you here, Phil.
Thanks for having me.
Please, Phil, tell us about your academic journey. Can you share your educational path?
For sure. So I like to say I took the scenic route towards medicine, being that there was a few detours along the way. So I did all of my training at McMaster, which is in Hamilton, Ontario. That's where I grew up. I started out doing a bachelor's degree. I was doing health sciences. I knew the plan pretty early on was to do medicine, so I did all the things that you do when you're interested in medical school. I joined a lab. I joined a bunch of pre-med committees and science clubs and all that good stuff. And I really enjoyed, just digging through different scientific questions. Working in a wet lab environment was pretty cool. We got to do experiments with, different cell lines and rats and mice, and that was a ton of fun. And I used that experience to inform my decision to go into medical school because I liked the translational process, taking that science, applying it to help people suffering from disease and illness. And somehow through that journey, I got involved in clinical research, which solidified that a bit further. So after I finished my undergrad, I took a year off to work as a research coordinator, used that as a second opportunity to apply to medical school again. So I'd initially applied out in my fourth year, applied again during my year off. So that was 2 years in a row that I didn't get in, which can be a bit frustrating when you define yourself by your academic success, which I'm sure a lot of people in science do. It just comes with the territory a little bit. So I had to go back to the drawing board, and I wanted to be very practical about what I was going to draw out. I knew that I needed further education to get a job down the road, whether that was going to be in medicine or outside of medicine. So I opted to do a master's degree in business administration, which was kind of a 180 from doing wet lab bench research and clinical study coordination. But I needed a change, and I took that opportunity to make a change, and it was a ton of fun. First day of business school, we did a marketing project doing Kraft Singles cheese slices, which really solidified that, okay, we're changing things up here. And that was really nice because I got to step out of my own comfort zone. I really got to meet people from a ton of different educational backgrounds, personal backgrounds, people doing the MBA. Not everybody was 1 year out of undergrad. People had kids, people had worked careers abroad. So that was a ton of fun. I focused my MBA co-op terms mostly on healthcare jobs. So I did some public administration. I worked in supply chain management. I did some entrepreneurship. Eventually found my way to pharma, which I really liked. I did some marketing there and analytics, worked for some pretty big companies. Really enjoyed that, finished my MBA, landed my dream job in pharma, and then my wife said, well, your MCAT's expiring. Maybe you should apply to medical school again. And I thought, that sounds like a really bad idea, but okay. So I applied again, and lo and behold, I got 3 interviews, I got 3 acceptance letters, and I was in a really unique situation of deciding, is this really what I want to do? You know, I'm being paid, and I'm financially doing quite well. I enjoy what I'm doing. Am I ready to blow up my life again? I'm glad I did it, but certainly added a couple years to my academic path. I ended up choosing McMaster, doing a 3-year MD there. Pretty early on, I decided that family medicine is what I wanted to do. Having that business background, I liked generalism and big picture thinking. So when I went through my medical training, that was always the plan, and ended up choosing New Brunswick as a place to do my training, mostly for personal reasons. I really needed to get out of the sprawl of southwestern Ontario, and for me, it was just time to get out of the big academic hospitals and that teaching environment, very research intensive. It was just time for another change. So here I am, just finishing up my residency doing family medicine, and really excited to see what's next.
Thank you so much, Bill. And just to add on, like, what was it that really inspired you to go into healthcare? And was it what you were expecting it to be?
Yeah, I think 2 really great questions. The big inspiration for me was always my father growing up. He's a respirologist, still practicing. He has a research lab, and he is someone that is really driven by scientific discovery and patient care, and that's the environment I grew up in. So very early on, I was interested in science. All the bedtime books were about science and physics and engineering and all of those interesting things. And in high school, I got really interested in watching House, which is probably a common thread for a lot of people. Medical shows, for some reason, draw people towards this profession. I think because it's an insight into what the day-to-day looks like. The reality is the day-to-day is not quite like Grey's Anatomy or House or any of those shows. There's certainly some parallels. Real medicine, yes, there's a lot of problem solving. There's a lot of clinical thinking. I find once you go through your medical training, you're thinking less about the cool science that drives a disease process, and you're really just getting very good at pattern recognition and understanding which medications to use in which situations. And that can be fun in its own right. It's a little bit different than what's portrayed on TV. Those are some of the big differences. I think some of the other big differences with clinical practice in the real world is patients are really sick, right? And people are really struggling. And sometimes there's not a lot you can do. A lot of the answers are solving social problems, whether that's income inequality or housing. And those are big problems to solve in a 15-minute clinic appointment. And that can be pretty frustrating because people are coming to you for help and you can't help them, right? That can certainly weigh you down a little bit. Not to mention all of the diseases that just don't have treatments or cures. People coming in with chronic pain issues and cancers that you can't treat. So that can be really challenging, especially early on. I think eventually you do get used to some of that, and that just becomes a part of the process. It doesn't make it any easier, but once you start getting more comfortable with those things and your pattern recognition catches up, you can go back to why you went into medicine in the first place, which for a lot of people is to work with patients, to get to know them, understand their story, and play some small role in helping them feel better or get better, whatever that might look like.
Thank you so much. There are a lot of students who are find the process a little bit daunting. If you could give any advice to undergraduate students looking to pursue a career in healthcare, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I think I have a unique perspective on this because I did my MBA before medical school, and I worked in hospital administration and some supply chain management. I did some entrepreneurship work with a startup out of university. I've worked for big corporate pharma companies. So I've seen healthcare from all sorts of different angles. And the advice I have there is this is a huge industry. And whether you're interested in clinical patient-facing roles or more administrative roles, more corporate roles, there is so much opportunity to work in healthcare. And you don't have to pigeonhole yourself into thinking clinical work is the only work that you can do in healthcare, or lab work is the only work that you can do in healthcare. You can do so many things for so many companies, and in doing so, help people all across the world. And just be open to different opportunities, really explore what's out there. I do think for a lot of people, an undergraduate degree is a step into the door, but most people do find they end up needing to do a master's degree or some sort of diploma or professional school, whatever it might be, just to help, direct them a little bit more, just because it is such a broad industry. But just be open to different opportunities and find what you like. And if you don't like something, if you do a co-op and it's not your cup of tea, you can do anything for 4 months, right? And pick up learnings from that. And now you don't like that. And then move on to the next thing, right? It's a process, and some things you're going to match with better than others.
Thank you so much, Phil. And regarding, the application process, how was that like? Can you give us some insight on the application process?
Absolutely. Keep in mind I'm old, so I applied to med school. It was 2018, or is it? Yeah, the 2018 application cycle, and I applied using the old MCAT. So some of the specific details are probably a bit different. I think there are necessary things to any medical school application, right? You need to have good marks. You need to have at least a decent MCAT. I wrote the MCAT 3 different times. That was 3 summers that I spent studying in my parents' basement while everybody else was outside having fun and traveling the world. So you got to be prepared to go through a bit of that grind. I don't think organic chemistry is a requirement of being a good doctor, but a lot of schools require you to take it. And that's just the reality. You have to take it, and you probably need a decent mark. So just accepting some of those things, yes, they're frustrating, but they're a part of the process. We could all rethink medical school admissions in 100 different ways, but that's just not the way it works. You got to check those boxes. You got to do some of your volunteering. Those are things that are important. I would say don't just pick up volunteer opportunities to put them on your CV. Pick things that you actually enjoy doing, and don't do too much. Right? It's better to have a few really good, solid pieces on your resume that you did well in, you excelled in, you really made an impact, than just having things on there to check boxes. But at the end of the day, it is a little bit of a game, and you got to play, and there are certain rules. And I don't think that's the way that it should be, but that's the way it is. And
to add on that, what work experience did you have prior to applying to medical school? I know you talked a little bit about, doing your MBA and afterwards, and what were some of the volunteer and research opportunities that you were involved in?
For sure. Yeah, so my medical school journey, it's kind of split into 2 chapters. So the first would be, I guess I could call it the undergrad chapter, where I applied when I was doing my bachelor's degree. And I did the bulk of my volunteering there. I joined an organization called Let's Talk Science, which you go into elementary school classrooms and you do science experiments. We brought a fish tank in and grew salmon, which was really cool, and taught the kids about conservation. That was one of the bigger ones that I spent time in. I already talked about doing the lab work. A lot of that was unpaid, except for in the summers. I got a few small stipends to help support that.
So what has been your favorite part of your healthcare journey so far?
I think my favorite part about this whole journey has just been the opportunity to try different things. And some things I absolutely loved, and some things I wasn't quite as passionate about. But everything I did, I learned something. And that's helped shape who I am today. And because I'm pretty happy with where I am, I take those successes and those failures and I say, well, that's great. That's what life is all about. It's about trying different things, letting yourself be vulnerable, figuring things out on your own. Google and YouTube and all these sorts of tools, you can figure out a lot, and science really teaches you to think. You just apply those skills and figure things out along the way, and that's been really rewarding to now be at the end of at least this chapter in my training and get ready for the next thing.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Phil, for joining us today.
Anytime. Happy to be here.
Joining us today is Hirbod, first-year medical student at Dalhousie Medicine. So introduce yourself, Hirbod, and tell us about your academic journey. Can you share your educational path with us?
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for having me. I think this is an exciting project. We didn't have podcasts when I was at UMB, and I always just I love listening to podcasts. So I was looking for podcasts that relate to Maritimes, even New Brunswick, and there never was that. So I think this will be helpful for future medical students or people who are interested. So my academic journey is pretty straight arrow. It's kind of boring, but I went to UMB and I did my biochemistry for my undergrad. I did my Bachelor of Science, and during my time I did an honors project as well with the Blight group. I did a chemistry research group and wrote my MCAT in my second year, and we could dive more into that, but got in right out of undergrad, and this was something I kind of wanted for a few years. So obviously there's more into that, and I'm sure we're going to discuss that soon, but here I am, first-year medical student.
Okay, thank you, Hirbod. We're happy to have you with us today. Our next question is, what inspired you to go into healthcare, and was it what you expected it to be?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say that I'm still very far from healthcare. We do get some exposure as the pre-clerkship years. So for whoever doesn't know, the med school curriculum gets divided into pre-clerkship, which is your first 2 years, and your clerkship years, which is your third and fourth year, which they kind of just throw you in a hospital setting and you get the real deal of it. But in my pre-clerkship years, Dalhousie does a really good job of actually giving you exposure to what an actual day in the life of a doctor works, and also even other allied healthcare professionals as well. So for example, I had a 12-week elective where I got to choose what kind of physician I wanted to shadow for every Tuesday for 4 or 5 hours, and I chose orthopedic surgery. And one of the benefits of going to a smaller school like Dalhousie and St. John is there's more doctors to student ratio, and there's less fellows and residents, so you actually get to experience just being one-on-one with the doctor. And for example, I scrubbed in for surgeries for 12 weeks straight, and I really got to see what it was like. So I guess answering your question, so what inspired me to go into healthcare? My parents are physicians, so I won't hide that information. I think that's pretty important. So I was kind of exposed to it from an early age, but they never really forced me to go into healthcare or even push. My older sister didn't even go into healthcare, and they didn't really care. But I had a few experiences in my undergrad years that kind of cemented the idea that I wanted to go into medical school, and one of them was working at Camp Rotary. So for people who don't know, Camp Rotary is a summer camp where you work with people with varying abilities and people of all ages, and you perform personal care, and you just get to hang out with some amazing people. And I worked there for a couple of years and volunteered, and that with along some other clinical volunteer work in my undergrad kind of was okay, this is what I want to do. And is it what I expected it to be? Absolutely, and more. I'm actually I liked it more. Right before medical school, I was having some uncertainties of is this what I actually want to do, or is it just something I said I want to do? But now that I'm there, it is reassuring that I love it, and it's a good process. So
Thank you so much, Hirbod. And that's actually a perfect segue, because our next question is, if you could give any advice to undergraduate students looking to pursue a career in healthcare, what would you tell them?
Yeah, for sure. So I think there's a lot of self-reflection going on, and I recommend it a lot. So first of all, ask yourself, do you want to be going into healthcare, or do you want to go into medicine? I think sometimes that's confusing, because I think healthcare is such a rewarding field, but it definitely has its challenges, and it's definitely not an easy career path. getting in and also being in it either. Like, there's definitely some ups and downs. So first I would ask yourself to like really find your why, like why do you want to go into medicine? After that, I think just go all in, like give it your all and don't be upset for any like drawbacks or bumps in the roads. Like no path is linear. The average age in my first year class is 28. So people have kids, people have PhDs, people have masters, people go to work for a few years abroad across Canada. Or people just take a few years off. Like, don't hurt yourself. We're all still in the same class, and nobody looks down on them. They have, like, better experiences than I do as just, like, coming straight from undergrad. So don't be hard on yourself, but also, like, if this is what you want, give it your all.
Thank you very much, Hirbod. And building on that, we were wondering if you could give any insight into what the application process was like.
Absolutely. So I'm going to talk about the application process when I applied, which was a couple of years ago, which I doubt there hasn't been much changes, but obviously refer to whatever school you're applying to. So first of all, there was the MCAT, and there's been less and less emphasis on the MCAT for whoever is like really stressed out about it. It's just one bump in the road. It's just one grueling test you got to get out of the way, but so it was only like 10% of my application when I applied. There's the Casper test, which is like a psychosocial test that you do. Again, only like 5% emphasis when I applied. So although they're like important and you have to take them seriously, don't really beat yourself up about it. Like I know people who got in with scores that might be lower than the average. But again, that average is just one score and your application as a whole process itself. The biggest part of your application is your like secondaries, which is like your supplementals, like what volunteer work you did and like what other experiences, like what life experiences you have. And the biggest thing is the interview. So that was 40% of my application, and that's when you use like your life experiences like in the interview, and that's what makes you stand out compared to everybody else. Because everybody who's applying is smart, everybody who's applying is like a good person, but you need to show them in that little interview that like they should choose you. And that's where your experiences before applying to medical school come out. So for example, if somebody's like, what's the hardest thing you've done in your interview? And your response is first year Decan lab in chemistry, or you mentioned like you led a team. Those are obviously two different magnitudes of answers, and one's more personable with you and your experience. And I think at the end of the day, that's what really matters.
And did you ever consider any other professions other than pursuing medicine? And if so, what was it that ultimately brought you to decide on medicine?
Yeah, to be honest, it's actually funny because while I did my interview and I was waiting for like the response, I had like a little life crisis of like, what do I actually want to do? And so it's not like I've always known. I've always been interested in medicine, and I always saw myself going into healthcare, whether I was a doctor or other like healthcare professional. But I was like, maybe I'll do a master's degree in business, maybe I'll go abroad. But at the end of the day, I think my heart always was with medicine, and I'm kind of happy I chose it. So if you're unsure about it, like that's totally normal. Just reflect on your like experiences and again why you want to go into medicine.
Great, thank you. And diving back into your application process, what kind of work experience did you have prior to applying to medical school, or any volunteer or research experience?
Yeah, so I applied to medical school in my third year. So actually, people who say you need research to go into medicine, I think that's not true. You will be exposed to a lot of research in medical school, so don't think you'll get away with that in undergrad if you skipped out on research experience. But so, for example, my research project in my honors was in my fourth year, so I didn't even have that on my application. So you don't need research to get into medical school. For volunteer work, I think this was where kind of like majority of my emphasis was when I was kind of like building my CV. I'm really firm believer in like if you're gonna volunteer in undergrad, you should do it in something you care about. Like it shouldn't be like, oh, like now I have to go volunteer on a Sunday morning. Like it should be like this is like my little break. And I really I'm also a firm believer in if you're gonna volunteer with something, see it through. Like it's, in my opinion, it's better to be have a leadership position in like three volunteer positions rather than just being a volunteer in 12 different clubs and just being like at the bottom of the pyramid. So yeah, just consider that if you're like, for example, like one of the things I was passionate about was working with kids with disabilities, and I discovered Spring, plug, check it out, UMB Spring, and that was like one of the most fun like UMB memories that I have. And every Sunday we would go and hang out, and it was not like a burden for me. Obviously, there's times where like I became the president in my 4th year, and there was times where it was like, okay, like I wish I didn't have to do this, but in life you just have to do things you don't want to do at times. And but most of the times it was like I was looking forward to going on Sunday and spending the time, and it was also like a really good learning experience as well. Another volunteer position was UMB Health Science Society, which I see Hala here, and I was also the co-president. I was the president of that in my 4th year, and that was also a really fun club. I learned a lot about just like the path to medical school that way as well, so it was beneficial in that regards. And yeah, other than that, it was just a lot of volunteer work, and I do recommend some clinical volunteering. Like I volunteered at the hospital for a long time actually until COVID happened, and then that kind of stopped it. But I will just mention that won't set you apart from people applying to medical school. Like majority of people will have some sort of clinical volunteer work, but I think it's really important that at the end of the day, in the interview, you're going to have to prove that you know what it means to become a healthcare worker. And if you have no background in clinical, like, ever, that might be a negative point in your application. So, but you don't need to be, for example, 100 hours of shadowing. Like, that's unnecessary.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And just to conclude, what has been your favorite part of your medical journey so far?
So my favorite part of my medical journey so far, even though it's a short one, has been just like the experiences we get with the patients, and even like the simulated patients and the volunteer patients where we practice our physical exams and histories has been like my favorite part of our medical school. But I will just talk about my journey with DMNB, which is Dalhousie Medicine New Brunswick, which a lot of people I feel like don't know about. Well, and if you're a UMB student, you're most likely living in New Brunswick. So if you're a New Brunswick resident, you automatically will be in the pool of DMNB applicants rather than the Halifax campus. And I didn't really know too much about the DMNB program, so I'm just gonna shed some light on it. It's a smaller program with 40 students in each year. It might be changing when you apply, but for my year it's 40. And we have access to the same lecture. Like, we are in the same lectures. We have access to the same tests, all the same materials. Basically, everything is the same. We're just on a different campus. And at times I was like, oh man, like maybe I'm going to a smaller school. There'd be less opportunities, but this is generally not the case. In my opinion, you actually have access to more opportunities because the ratio of students to doctors is better, in your favor at least. And my classmates have just been amazing. Like, we all know each other so well, so we share resources. And I will just mention, like, it's not a bad program. So you could reach out to me if you have any questions about DMNB, and I'll be happy to share that, any experience.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us today, Hirbod, and giving us so much valuable insight into a UMB student's journey to medicine. We wish you the very best in the rest of your journey.